kids had either social phobia or relationship anxiety of some
Yes,
sort.
please.
Gotcha. So my name is Charles Smith. I work at the David P. Weichert Center for Youth Program Quality. We are the organization that worked with the folks at the SCE Foundation and Lakita and a number of other partners to do the SEL Challenge. This training today is an introduction to the content of the SEL Challenge and one of its products, which is the SEL Strengths Builder. The Weichert Center is a performance measurement organization. We specialize in observational measurement, observation-based measurement of adult practice, but we measure lots of other kinds of things too. And so in working on SEL, obviously our goal was to describe, define a number of objects, both child skills, and within those skills, the belief component, the behavioral component that make up the skill, as well as the practices that press the skill into existence or give opportunities to practice the skill, both the mental parts and the behavioral parts. That, you know, again, there's nothing new in this work, but even when you try to do a slice at it, it takes some time. So our interim step in the measurement process for SEL work is the Strengths Builder. The Strengths Builder consists of a number of, we describe a number of objects, right? Practices, and how you count them, basically, right? It's an intermediate step. We will build more sophisticated measures for these things as we go along, but this is the place that we're at right now. Our goal is to take the three primary types of object in the SEL Challenge. The youth skills within SEL domain, and in particular the behaviors that they exhibit to show they know how to do the skill. The teacher practices and the environmental characteristics, again, that support that skill or press that skill into existence or give opportunities to practice. And then curriculum features. Those are attributes of how the content gets laid out, how the practices get delivered to the kids that are more an organizational type phenomenon. So there's a long list of all those things, and we want to help people count them. So that's what the Strengths Builder is about. So let's do an activity how many of you, do you guys all know each other? Of course. Is this all right, so let's do a mixer. What we're going to do today is we're going to get to know each other a little bit. We're going to think about some of the concepts of SEL and how practice and youth skills come together. We're going to become expert at some domains of practice, and then we're going to talk. Okay, so I don't have a highly ambitious agenda. I'm going to try to really crank us through. I'd like to leave 15 or 20 minutes at the end where we could just talk, have some Q&A, and raise any issues that might be bubbling up from the earlier content or for the content we're working in here. Okay. But let's get to know each other for a second. I'd like you to stand up, go find someone that you don't know, and talk about something that interests you for about 30 seconds. Then I'm going to holler and ask you something. All right, so somebody share one interesting thing that you learned about somebody. Anything unexpected or shocking? Yes, please.
I spoke with two people who are just passionate about the theme of the conference and what they do, and so we spoke just about why we're here and sort of what we hope to get out of it. So it wasn't shocking, but it was super motivating.
Yeah, right on. That's motivating. Or appreciation is good too. Anything you really appreciated that you heard?
That somebody's going to spend time with their 2-year-old digging into Thomas the Train.
Yeah, right on.
That makes me feel good.
Yeah, Thomas the Tank Engine. Gotta love him. Go ahead. Anybody else? Yeah, please.
Just how the personal and the professional have to mirror. You just cannot separate them. We found ourselves talking about our nieces,
Yeah, right on.
our adolescent nieces. How do we
Count the numbers between 1 and 6. 1, 2,
5, 6,
1,
2,
3, 4.
5, 6, 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
1,
2, 3, 5,
1.
2.
Okay, so emotion management, empathy, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right? Emotion management's 1, empathy's 2, teamwork is 3, responsibility is 4, initiative is 5, and problem solving is 6. So find, I'd like to have groups of all, there are 3 parts of the strength builder. Again, self-assessing your curriculum, self-assessing practices, and then assessing the youth skills. That's the practices, the adult practices part of the strengths builder there. So you can just grab it, take a look at it. Again, you've seen a million things like this.
One, but also if we don't have something to offer, that's okay too, because that's the nature of a team.
Yeah, right. Several of the organizations built the concept of repairs into their staff meetings. At the end of every staff meeting was a time when you could do repairs. Anything you think you might have pissed someone off about earlier in the day or prior in the week, you can raise it in that safe space and just bring it up and it can just be acknowledged. You don't have to solve it, but it was interesting across. All right, so that's teamwork. What's next? Initiative. Responsibility. Sorry. Responsibility. You can be quick comment.
Okay. So I guess the conversation was around if we expect them to take on responsibilities, how do we get them to own and buy into that responsibility and scaffold it for different types of responsibilities. I don't think we can expect our students to step up to those huge roles unless we're going to give them small chance or opportunities to practice in different roles along the way. And in the same way of thinking about adults, not all adults within an organization are at the same place to take on XYZ responsibilities. So how do we scaffold and provide opportunities for adults to develop in their responsibilities and provide a model responsibility for our students?
Great. Initiative?
So one of the things that we were talking about is just developing initiative in young people who are exhausted by the time they get to the program at the end of the day, and how it really, I mean, here in the coaching element of staff practice, you really sort of call out that tiredness, tedium, and boredom that you're gonna have to support young people through when they walk in the door, because you might have 60% of them might be really glad to be there, but you've got the other 40%. And so how do you work with young people at their various levels to get them on board?
Okay. Really talk about what they were trying to do. And then we sent a team out to measure all the stuff that was going on at the organization to see if, in fact, those out-of-school time programs were a lot higher quality and the kids were a lot more engaged than another reference group of the many other ones that we work with. And we found out that was, in fact, the case. So we measure quality, and we found out that the programs in the SEL Challenge were exceptionally high quality when we went and watched what the adults were doing. For those of you who may know anybody here know the Youth Program Quality Assessment? So the ratings on the Youth Program Quality Assessment across these 8, and again, these are offerings. This is not the whole organization. This is one offering focused on SEL, but across these offerings was, the average was over 4.5. In terms of engagement, at each of the 3 time points when we measured quality, we also asked the kids 5 questions about their engagement in that moment today about this content I'm working on right now. Are you interested in it? Do you feel challenged? Do you feel like you belong here? Almost all the kids said that they were very engaged at all time points. So super high quality adult practice, very engaged kids. That would lead us to believe that even though we don't have a control group in this, there are 8 exemplary programs, that if we see the skills go up over those 3 time points, that gives us some reason to believe that the skills are actually going up. And it's actually because of what's happening, because there's high quality stuff happening in the setting and the kids are saying they're into it, they're paying attention. Their attention is focused on the thing that's important. So that was the methodology. So we did a qualitative side with the experts. We asked them in many ways, almost painfully. And other times we asked them, what are you doing? What are you doing at this moment? The kids experience challenge. What's your response? In many interviews and focus groups, and did a qualitative method to produce standards for SEL, which are in the books that I've passed out. These books. So this book contains a set of what we call standards for social emotional learning. Again, there are no new ideas in this work. We did start with an evidence base. There was 20-some years of Reed Larson's work. He's at the University of Illinois, or Illinois. He's been interviewing kids, doing qualitative articles that are published in Child Development and other leading kind of research journals. But he's been interviewing kids, and so we started with the voice of the kids as it was concretized in this research. And then we didn't have to spend a lot of time talking to the kids. We kind of moved from that evidence base about what the kids said were happening. That's where we got the 6 domains of SEL. And then we were able to move and focus our time on the adults, asking the adults what they said they were doing. So these are the standards for practice. There is also a technical report that has just been released that contains the description of all the methodology, the quantitative and the qualitative, and all the measures, and all the results from we did quantitative performance studies at each organization too. So those are the products. And then we had this thing, the strengths builder are the kind of the first iteration of the measures. Yeah, right. So these are those parts on the pointer. So the technical report is about to be released. There's a website that is up and running, has been for a year, and then this guide with the standards. Qualitative, quantitative, and all the tools. You've got a copy of this. I know that's pretty difficult to read, but I've given you this piece has a copy of this. These are the 6 SEL domains. The domain definition. So in emotion management, ability to be aware of and constructively handle both positive and challenging emotions. This was a discussion of youth skill. Because we had to start with youth skill. We had to ask the experts, hey, what is it the kids learn here? What do they come into the program unable to do and leave the program able to do? And how would you define it? And so we started out with definitions of youth skill, but we then very quickly moved from, okay, if these are the skills you want to grow, what are the practices necessary to help that happen? What's the environment like? What's the context? What's the curriculum? So while we started out with skill, our main focus was on those instructional practices. And so we broke instructional practices down into staff practices. This is the stuff the staff said they did. And then something else we called youth key experiences, which are really the adults' kind of mental model of what's happening with the kids, right? Because we weren't asking the kids. We were asking the adults what they thought was going on with the kids. And what's experience? Experience is basically your memory, your long-term memory that gets pulled up into working memory, and it describes a context and often an affect. And maybe some behavior, and maybe some knowledge, right? But you can pull it back. It's stuff that's happened to you in the past that you can pull from long-term memory into working memory and act it out. And so we asked the staff, what do you think that is? What's going on inside the kids' heads? What are the key experiences? So those are the 2 things and those key experiences, although they're about youth, they're all framed in a way that point to what the adults do. Because that's what we're interested in here, again, is the adult practice. So every domain has a definition of the skill domain, which are not the most precise in the world. Like this one, empathy is not the accepted definition of empathy, but it's where our experts landed. Definitions of empathy are usually more about how parallel mine and your thoughts and feelings are. This is not quite that, but we wanted to go with the experts. So a definition of the domain, and then standards for the practices and youth key experiences. So that's the content of the work. The 6 domains, we also came up with some groovy pictures to kind of simplify or communicate. Maybe it's not more simple, but to communicate more readily the meaning of the domains. So in addition to the practices, and there were, I think we created 72 either standards or the sub-practice indicators. So they're descriptors of good practice. And we tried to, another part of our method was these, the folks, the expert practitioners, their voices were so powerful in the way that they could describe what they were doing and what was happening with the kids. That was part of the reason we recruited them, because they were really articulate in some clinical language or disciplinary language. They had a way to talk about this stuff. They were all different, but they could really talk about what they were trying to do. Our goal was also to get vignettes in their voice. So the reason the book is so thick is because for all of the 70-some standards and practice indicators, there are 3 extended vignettes of the practitioner in a different language or clinical practice language talking about what that means to them. And this comes right from the interview data. So that different people who have different approaches to doing the same thing can find themselves in that. So there are 350 vignettes that were selected to go with the 70-some indicators. So you can pick any of those practices. They're all good, right? They're all good. It's the same stuff that's in the learning sciences that neuroscience and cognitive science says are good for learning. It's a lot of the same stuff. It's hard to go wrong. You can pick any of the practices to really work on. But there was also a curriculum. There was also a thing that happened across these 8 programs that was that was common across the 8. And we called that project-based learning with intensive co-regulation. And that's a mouthful, and we don't expect people to copy that and use it, but it kind of says what it is. It's all these 8 programs, all these offerings had an intensive thing they were trying to do. They were trying to build a boat, or do a really elaborate theater project, or they were in the Boston Public Schools, basically doing political organizing, in most cases resisting the Boston Public Schools, even though they're the ones who pay for the kids to do it. They're fighting about the bus passes and mandatory expulsion. I mean, these kids are engaged in heavy political action in the city of Boston, and so they're running these campaigns. They're all these intensive, multi-step, skill-building projects that have lots of opportunities. And now it depends on whether you culturally are kind of the Protestant ethic, like who thinks about the opportunity to fail and you know, trial and error, and you can, or the people who would never mention failure in the presence of a child. They only talk about challenge. But we were kind of half and half in the 8. But it was all about really hard projects with lots of skills that need to be developed to complete them and be successful. And the moments for SEL happened when the challenges occurred, when the failures occurred. And that was the moment, and the staff had responsive practices. They could step in, and so they could co-regulate. They could help kids respond with their motivation or their emotion or their attention. They can model it. Look, this is happening. I'm sorry this is happening. Here's what I do, or here's what I am doing. And so modeling the SEL skills and the affective responses, right? The adults are there. These folks have their act together. They're not triggered by the kids in the setting. They can help the kids with a positive affect the whole time, and it help them attach vicariously that positive affect to the use of that SEL skill, right? And so it's a very sophisticated thing going on in the teaching of these SEL skills. So there were all these standards that came out, and any of them could be picked to work on. But there was also this curriculum design, which I think, as I talked to College Track and the Silicon Valley Children's Fund, you know, getting into college is a serious project. You got to work on that. There's a lot of steps. There's a lot of skills necessary. So it's a perfect opportunity for you to co-regulate with the kids in those difficult moments. So we came up with this kind of cartoon version of the theory and the findings. And so I think let's talk about that next. It's been passed out to you in a bifold sheet. So why don't I give you a minute to look at that, and I'd like you to interpret it, right? There's very little narrative text here. It's a picture. So I'd like you to interpret the meaning of the picture. What do you think the theory is? And what do you think is happening in that picture? So look at it for a minute, and then I'm going to ask you to take another couple of minutes and talk to the person next to you about what you see. What do you think we're trying to communicate in this picture? So go ahead and look at it, and then you can jump in and start talking about it. Oh, thank you. All right, so it sounds like you've got a few things to talk about. What are you seeing in the picture? What are we trying to say here? Or some of the things we're trying to say?
So many things.
There's a lot going on here. Anyway.
Well, I'll say I love how students progress in this sort of project-based, student-driven scenario, and the occurrence of the different SEL practices change over time.
Yeah. That was a super interesting one. We actually found a sequence of the domains through time in 7 of the 8 offerings. They explicitly, they started with isms and talked about sexism, racism, ableism, adultism, and got the kids just judging things. Judgment came out, and they're judging the world, and they're judging each other, and then they were able to talk about who they are. And they go inside, and they help them tell their story, and you start to see how people feel when they're being judged, right? And so right at the very forefront, empathy is a key part. Empathy and teamwork are a key part of the work. And also, interestingly, initiative doesn't really appear till like midway through the offering. The folks in the challenge were very explicit that you can't ask kids to come in with motivation because they don't yet know why they're there. Motivation is something that develops midway through. And the SEL skills around responsibility, or what we might also call conscientiousness, diligence, that's really happening at the end, right? And it was all through the medium of the role. The kids had a role in the project and in the organization, and as they got good at it, and as they started to see what happened when they didn't fulfill it, and all those kids they got close to there at the beginning in empathy, were being disappointed when they weren't fulfilling the role, responsibility starts to occur towards the end of the project. Emotion management and problem solving are there the whole way, but the problem solving gets way more sophisticated by the end as the adult is backing away from the project context. Now again, this is youth work, right? This is youth work method, positive youth development. This is the old school version of how to work with adolescents. So not a lot surprising, but it was really interesting to see them explicitly mapping the curriculum in that way. What else?
I guess I have a follow-up question
Sure.
to that. Was this developed before doing the pilot, like before running tests of using this curriculum, or was this after it was done in 8 different project-based scenarios that they saw trends of that
After.
sort of development phase? Okay.
So this is a portrayal of the findings.
And so I guess then something I noticed after finding sort of that there was a sequential sort of path to things that were growing. How, and I guess we'll probably get to some of this later on, but what is, one thing I sort of noticed is what is the way that a program can like see if they're aligned in terms of their own sort of programming? Is there some way to say like, in this many months or this many years that a kid is with you, you will see this level of growth, or is it more fluid in terms of how it's tracked that way?
Well, so, there's growth and then there's change. So there's growth in the same thing and then there's change into the new thing. So that all gets kind of complicated. But we created a staff rating of youth behavior as a measure. And we're trying to not just measure really micro behaviors, but kind of strings of things. And those were created by asking the experts, hey, what do the kids not know how to do when they come in, but they know how to do when they leave? And which of those things are really hard, and maybe some of the kids don't even get there. So we tried to handle that issue in that way with measurement, realizing that these measures are at the very early stages of development. So, we did standards and measures, but this is really about the expertise of the program staff in designing the curriculum, the response with those tools to the specific kids. So it's not that fixed at this point. Yeah.
I have a question. So I'm seeing the image as a linear process, but when we think about project-based learning, oftentimes students have to go back to a first step or a second step or iterate and get feedback, and then sort of like, how does this image might capture that circular process? Because we know projects are linear, that we have to go back to the first step and reevaluate, and then the emotions of managing the emotions and having to reevaluate.
Yeah.
How does
I think there's one part of the picture where one of the blocks is falling. Isn't there a falling block somewhere? Anyways, we started out with circles and we just couldn't, this had a lot of it in.
We need to animate it.
Yeah. I could do a little act.
A little modeling.
Yeah, so that's huge. And, it's not a circular picture. What else?
So I'm interested, I actually work at New Teacher Center, and we have been looking at what we call integrated practices. So I'm intrigued by how empathy is a practice, because from my perspective, unless you develop skills like listening, then actually there's some sub-skills that are required within each of these pieces that are mentioned, or teamwork, feedback is an essential part of being a good team member, of like not giving person-oriented praise, but actually being really specific. So I'm just intrigued about sort of the choices, and also excited to see, what you're doing.
So we'll get into it in a minute, where we actually look within each domain at the practices and indicators, the standards and indicators for each domain, and you'll see those kinds of, that level of detail. Because, this is very abstract. Yeah.
I was just gonna ask you, just about everything on that drawing is labeled, like we know what the ground is, we know what the process is. I'm curious about what you think the roof is, because I have some thoughts about that.
Oh, please. The roof is the thing that makes it one place. In our rendering of it, they did it as a house, so it represents a safe space where people would be. But where else might you take it?
Well, so safe space is listed under the ground, and so I was kind of thinking that the roof would be the organization's commitment to making this happen.
Yeah, right on. Protecting it. Yeah, that's great. Okay, responsive practices is a really important part, and I'm going to mention that now, just because when you look at the 6 domains, you don't necessarily see the responsive practices are there in the staff practices. They're actually labeled as 4 types of responsive practice, but it doesn't get, you have to look in kind of deeply to see it. So, coaching, modeling, scaffolding, facilitating. We found out that as the kids go through the project, they start to experience challenge, and you know, there are two, like in Gil's pyramid, there are 2 groups of kids. All these kids come from difficult neighborhoods, but that doesn't mean they all have SEL skill deficits or that they all have at the top of the pyramid. Some of them are just fine. Their parents have given them some resilience, or however it's happened. They're in a difficult circumstance, but they're in pretty good shape. Others of the kids had risk. About 35% of the kids in the study, we only had one real clinical risk factor. We were interested in social phobia and relationship anxiety. Kids who had a hard time with relationships might have a hard time getting the treatment in an offering that's all about relationships. So that was the only risk factor that we actually measured as a kind of a clinical risk factor. About 35% of the kids had either social phobia or relationship anxiety of some sort. So there was a mix. Even there were diverse kids in every program, and they were diverse on their level of risk. So the responsive practices were when a kid's experiencing frustration and emotions are running high, being able to step in right in that moment and model is a key set of skills. And so it was, you know, people did it as social workers. There were various ways people who were into some people were really into mindfulness. They had different languages for how to step in and be present and co-regulate. But it was a super important part of what the adults knew how to do. In the model, it had implications for staffing too, because you couldn't stop the whole project because one kid was having a tough moment. That means you have to have enough staff in the room so that someone can respond to a young person who's having a challenge of some sort, and somebody else can keep the work and the rest of the kids moving. So it has, in the findings in the technical report, we say basically, hey, this is either going to cost more money because you got to pay people with higher skills, or you got to add more people. Especially the greater the need or risk of the kids, the more intensive the staffing is going to have to be. So let's not pretend that we can come up with a silver bullet that's going to cut all our costs to do SEL. No, we're just figuring out what the heck it is, and it's going to cost more. And we might as well just start getting ready for that right now.
Amongst young people, which I completely agree, for us in American culture is not something that we're like just.
We're running really short on time, so let me ask you a question. We have, the next activity was to dig into these standards, into the domains. So we could spend the last 10 minutes doing that activity, digging into the domains, and everybody becoming an expert at one domain, and then sharing. Or we could just talk. So it's up to you. We could talk and ask questions. So what would you prefer to do? Would you like to go a little deeper into the strengths builder? Or would you like to just kind of do Q&A about this content? So that's the 6 domains and the practices that make them up. Those are the domains, yeah. I've run out of time, I'm sorry. The transition from the panel to this thing cost me about 15 minutes. Let's do it, okay. So I'm gonna ask you to number off between 1 and 6. I'm gonna count the numbers between 1 and 6. 1, 2, 4,
5, 6.
1,
2,
3, 4,
5, 6. 2, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
1,
2, 3, 5.
1.
2.
Okay, so emotion management, empathy, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right? Emotion management is 1, empathy is 2, teamwork is 3, responsibility is 4, initiative is 5, and problem solving is 6. So I'd like to have groups of all one number. So the strengths builder part, the way that you actually rate your performance on these items, this is one for the practices, there's one for the curriculum, one for the practices, and then there are the youth measures. So I'm just going to set these back here on the table, and as you go out, if you want to take one and take a look at it, all the strengths builder in totality is free and it's available on the SEL SEL.org website, but I'll set this green copy here, and it's just, there are 3 parts of the strength builder. Again, self-assessing your curriculum, self-assessing practices, and then assessing the youth skills. That's the practices, the adult practices part of the strengths builder there. So you can just grab it, take a look at it. Again, you've seen a million things like this. They're really not very good measures, but they're good for talking about it, right? And thinking how much of something you do. So with that said, there are 6 domains. Let's just pop around the room. And what's the question? The question is, in your work, which one of the standards that you read in your domain resonated most for you? All right? So you guys just read these domains, and let's take maybe 2 examples so we'll go around twice. So can we start with the emotion management domain? Does somebody want to offer one that you thought was particularly important? Or
We ended with the question I asked based on this, knowing that staffing is always imperfect.
yeah.
And modeling can be very challenging for any adult in terms of emotion management. So the element of the structure and how often does that compensate for a lack of our ability as an adult to appropriately model or provide enough of an outlet to and structure to reflect meaningfully at least on what we've experienced.
So how does that relate to something that you think is important? What's the
Well, I feel like we spent a lot of time in this session thinking about how adults needing to be appropriate representatives of what we're practicing and preaching with the youth we're engaging with. So how can we do that in a realistic way, even though we have these ideals that are somewhat unachievable?
Well, I don't know if I'm going to go along with the unachievable because this is what these folks said they did. This is where it comes from. But it's tough to do, and I can tell you that in we've done I think 16 of these. This is the full day training. We're getting the content for 45 minutes, but we've done about 15 or 16 of these, and the emotion management and the empathy domains. When I say to people, these are kind of the countercultural domains. You really don't in the United States get trained how to be empathetic and how to really effectively manage our emotions. It's not really part of our institutional structure. So, and people really relate to that. And they come up afterwards and they say, you know what, I struggle with this. I'm trying to figure out how to do it. I don't know how to teach other people. My staff don't know how to do it. And it's not like something that people are incompetent, but we just haven't practiced this stuff very much. It's not really in our culture. So it's kind of countercultural. Yeah, they're the areas where we need more supports and more training, more response for how to build structure and then how to enact it. I think that's clearly been identified in our early taking this stuff up. Okay, so let's go to empathy. Who is empathy? Somebody want to offer just discuss one of the practices that you thought was important? Yeah, please.
So we talked a little bit about acceptance, I think, the most, and thinking about students needing to, it being about the ability to make a connection between like people's experiences and the way they show up. So they're supposed to know their own identity, and be able to articulate that, and you have to make a connection between like how you're showing up and what your experiences are that are making you show up that way. And then in order to empathize and accept others, you have to understand and judge and think about why other people are showing up the way that they're showing up.
Teamwork?
For teamwork, I think it's actually a great segment from empathy because talking about sort of like the 3 areas in terms of practices like structuring and modeling and facilitating, it's important that anyone, young or old, understand that to build teamwork effectively and why it's can be hard in some programs is there's other skills involved, whether it be empathy or listening or just, even just sort of reflection that you're able to pause and go, okay, this is group work and it's frustrating because of this, not because of some other thing, is a super important practice. And having the adults in the environment show that and facilitate that, but not just in like, oh, we're smiling and pretending to work together in front of the kids kind of way, but like, oh, there's a conflict in between the team member that are adults. Here's how we effectively in front of you go through this together and seek solutions and are empathetic and are doing all these
organization built the concept of repairs into their staff meetings. At the end of every staff meeting was a time when you could do repairs. Anything you think you might have pissed someone off about earlier in the day or prior in the week, you can raise it in that safe space and just bring it up and it can just be acknowledged. You don't have to solve it, but it was interesting across. All right, so that's teamwork. What's next? Initiative. Responsibility. Sorry. Responsibility. You can be quick,
I'll
comment.
take it. So I guess the conversation was around if we expect them to take on responsibilities, how do we get them to own and buy into that responsibility, and scaffold it for different types of responsibilities. I don't think we can expect our students to step up to those huge roles unless we're going to give them small chance or opportunities to practice in different roles along the way. And in the same way, thinking about adults, not all adults within an organization are at the same place to take on XYZ responsibilities. So how do we scaffold and provide opportunities for adults to develop in their responsibilities if we're going to model responsibility for our students?
Great. Initiative.
I'll go. So one of the things that we were talking about is just developing initiative in young people who are exhausted by the time they get to the program at the end of the day, and how it really, I mean, here in the coaching element of staff practice, you really sort of call out that tiredness, tedium, and boredom that you're gonna have to support young people through when they walk in the door, because you might have 60% of them might be really glad to be there, but you've got the other 40%. And so how do you work with young people at their various levels to get them all on board?
Okay. Problem solving.
So I think what really stood out for me was in the staff practices scaffolding, and then looking at kind of the role of the teacher or the adult. First, playing the role of the teacher, and then transitioning or evolving into more of a coach or an advisor. And so, to me, that goes back to creating the right type of environment and space for students to learn, and understanding that in developing a skill like problem solving, that it's not just an end state, it's a process, and so the staff practice has to mirror that process as well.
Awesome. Okay, so in the training, we would spend a couple hours doing this activity, digging into these domains, and then take lunch, and then after lunch is curriculum mapping. So you actually draw a sequence of activities that represents the offering that young people are going through in the offering, and start to think about where did the experiences occur. You want to know dosage, right? How many opportunities to practice these kinds of skills occur in a context, because dosage is one of the important things that tells us about impact. So that's the kind of work we do in the training. Our argument, again, in terms of policy terms, at the end of the technical report, which is just about released, is that it would cost a lot for a whole region to train all the workforce in a region to be good at all of this stuff. That's a major undertaking. But by having some ways to count this and creating environments where people can talk about it, we can start to identify people who are already good at it and who've already really been thinking about this stuff. And just hearing the comments in this room, there are people in this room who could give guidance on all of these issues, who have considerable professional experience that could help us move forward. So our goal, we're a performance measurement organization. Half the time, our strategy is to get your organization out of your way, to allow people to say, hey, look, I'm being accountable, as a matter of fact. Here's the proof. So the goal in this work is to create, at least at this first stage, a way to count the good stuff you're doing and to identify the people who already know how to do it. Because those people should have resources drawn to them, and their work should be replicated in communities. So that's the kind of the political strategy behind this work at this point. This is the kind of conversation these tools are designed to provoke and promote. And with that said, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Have a great day. There you go.